French people feel weak and not protected. So the anger is growing. If we carry on this way, we'll have a civil war.
Den unge mand, han revolutionær.
The arc of the moral universe is long, but it tends toward justice.
How dare you?
Welcome everybody to the Manifesto podcast. Today is the 15th of November 2023. We're really glad to have two distinguished guests to talk about the crisis we're seeing, I think, all over Western Europe right now, as it relates to the war in Gaza, and also the tensions between Muslim immigrant population in Europe and the Western liberal world. We have Fanny Forsberg Lundell with us, who has written extensively about the difference and the similarities between both Swedish and the French experience of dealing with immigrants. And we have also Florence Bergeaud-Blackler, who is an anthropologist who has studied both the French context of this, the Muslim Brotherhood, and has been a debater and an opinionated person on this. So we're really glad to have you. Thank you and welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
We will try to, the overarching, if you want to approach this positively, then the question is somehow, how do you build multi-ethnic or multi-religious societies in the Western world? We thought it relevant to try to dig down into how can we understand this both in the recent historical memory, but also how our respective countries sort of understood or dealt with multi-ethnic societies or multi-religious.
I think we just have to kick this off with saying something. We're having this conversation in English, which feels denigrating to our guests, but it is the curse of the Western world that we're having this conversation in English. But I think it, just for that reason, the French perspective for me has always been very interesting because the correlates to Sweden have been there all the time. There are two very different cultures, two very different systems, obviously. But I've always, for at least 10 years, seen the similarities of this. And this is, I think, why me and Johan thought it so poignant to have a discussion of the France and Swedish context here. Both in Sweden and English-speaking countries, I think France is, for linguistic reasons, but also for us being very dominated by the UK and American media, I think the context of what's happening in France and the development the last 10 years always come to us in flashes. It's Charlie Hebdo, it's Samuel Paty, it's the teacher who got killed, I think, Dominique Bernard, thank you. I think it comes to us in flashes, but I don't think we see the context of. So I'd like us to begin somewhere with describing what is happening in France.
Thank you very much for your invitation. Yes, we are in a special context at the moment with the attack of Israel by the Hamas, which is a Muslim Brotherhood organization coming from the jihadist arms. And so the Israel-Palestine conflict, I think, has made very clear that Muslims are mobilizing in the name of the Ummah, the Islamic nation, all around the world. So we realize clearly now that we do not have just territorial conflict between Israel and Palestine, but something like a manifestation of the strength of the global Muslim nation, its determination to protect the holy places. So that makes this dramatic event, a bit more different than the previous conflict we used to observe during the last 40, 50, and even 70 years since 1948. We see enormous amount of people, Muslim, but also non-Muslim, supporting not just the Palestinians, but sometimes Hamas as a resistant movement. So this makes a bit different. And from here, we can go to the question of Muslim Brotherhood. So at first, we can say that in Muslim families who are in France and in Europe for maybe 3, 4, 5 generations, there is culture of support for Palestine and the Palestinians. Several generations of people from the Maghreb, from Turkey, from Pakistan, living in Europe have been made aware of the plight of the Palestinians since 1948. But more often than not, Israel has been presented as a devil, as a Zionist Western power backed by American capitalist imperialism. So the hatred of Israel has been reinforced by a detestation of the Jews, which is present in a religious text. The Muslim Brotherhood has always said that they wanted to cultivate this hatred. In my book, I note a word of Youssef al-Qaradawi, who is a thinker of the Muslim Brotherhood, who said that the hatred of the Jews must be cultivated. So this is the context, the present context. So to come to your questions about the relation between cult, religion, and state. France is obviously a secular country, like others in Europe. But when the secularism, the separation of church and state, is written in the constitution, so the separation laws are centralized at national level, and it's very strictly applied. The state do not found any religious activity. Sometimes the state can found a little church, but for architectural reasons, as a tradition, but not as a support for the cult. So there is no religious instruction in public schools. There is a strict ban on the hijab at schools and other measures. Recently, the fight against radicalism and Islamism has taken the form of what we called a law on separatism. This law on separatism was published in 2021 and prohibits all associative activities that contrary to the values of the Republic. So this is a good step, but unfortunately, these measures are not very effective against the legalist Islamism. What is a legalist Islamism? Is the form of Islamism who are not physically violent, but who are psychologically violent. So the Muslim Brothers act always as much as they can within the law. This is why we called it Islamism legalist. And also because when this law on separatism is not very effective, because when we forbid an association, they can move their headquarters across the Belgian border and carry on their activity like before. So this is the problem we have in the progress we make in France against the Islamism, is that the fact that France is isolated and other countries around, like Belgium, which is French-speaking country as well, does not play the same game. So the people who are forbidden in France go to Belgium. It's 1 hour and 30 or 40 minutes from Paris, Italy. This limited, of course, the measure taken in France.
Yeah, I was thinking in your book, Florence, you write about the allies of the Brotherhood, the allies of Islamism. And I think that we may find the same problems in France and Sweden here. Because one of the reasons that I discovered your book was actually that we had a similar book, so to speak, a thesis coming out just a few months before your book by Sami Egyptson. You're aware of this work. And it seems like, as you say, I mean, even if we have laws or even if you have a very strong secularism in France, you have still not succeeded in fighting, combating the Brotherhood. Could you say something about these allies? Because I think that's very important for our audience also to understand. And how do we identify these, and how do we then fight these.
Yes, indeed. Sameh Gibson has published a thesis recently on Muslim Brotherhood in Sweden and in Europe, focusing really on the institutions. My book is a bit different. It's focused a bit of institution, but rather in the ideology and the doctrines of the movement, much more than the institutions, because it's extremely difficult to study them because they are completely secret. So Sameh Gibson spent an enormous amount of time and analysis in his thesis to demonstrate the reality, the existence of these secret networks. And so it's extremely valuable work for us. I focus more on the ideology, on his roots, the fact that what I call the brotherism or the frérisme is the result of two branches. One branch coming from the Muslim Brotherhood from Egypt, and one other branch which is coming from the Indo-Pakistanis area through UK and the anglo-saxon world, which is the branch of Maududi and the Jamaat Islami. So these two branches for me meet around in the 1970s and give birth to what I call the brotherism. So the brotherism will not be as effective as we can see if it didn't have the help of allies.
Exactly.
Because the brotherism use the strength of its enemies against themselves. It uses the liberty, the freedom, against the liberty and the freedom of our liberal societies. Because it doesn't believe to the democratic system and to the human rights. It doesn't believe it, but it uses it against itself.
Right. Do you think that could be why, for instance, Sweden has been a very easy target for the Muslim Brotherhood?
It was one of the targets, but I would say that all European countries in Western society who welcome the students and the refugees from Muslim Brotherhood all around the world since from the 1960s, they were very welcoming, and so they install their institutions all around Western Europe, not just Sweden. But it's true that Sweden was particularly welcoming to the foreigners. So obviously they stay where they feel well and they are free to meet, free to express. So the battle, there has been a battle in the 1960s when the first Muslim refugees, Muslim Brotherhood refugees and students arrived in the campuses. So some decided to go back to their country to help to build a Muslim caliphate in a Muslim country, and some others decided to stay in Europe because they were free of expression, free of they were in very good conditions to not just help the Muslim country to become really Islamic, but to help the Islam spreading all over the world for accomplishing the prophecy of the caliphate. So they decided to stay in Europe. And so Sweden was a very strong point for Muslim Brotherhood, but also the UK, also in France, and also in Switzerland. They were very influenced to the wide network they installed in Europe. They also decided to, because it was not obvious at first, because they wanted to make sure that their strategy was licit in terms of Islamic rules. So to make alliance with non-Muslim was discussed. And so they decided to accept temporary alliance with some of their enemies who are not Muslim, if the point was to fight a greater opponent. So you can be allied temporarily with the left, and indeed the left has been qualified as a useful idiot.
Yeah.
It's true that they play a very toxic role in the spreading of this ideology.
Yes, and it is true that both France and Sweden, I mean, Kalle started talking about that Sweden and France are so different in many ways, right? And they are, but something they do have in common is that they have a strong leftism past. And I think that this may be a factor which can explain why we have both been quite exposed to this phenomenon. And we have dealt with, we have different relationships to our Muslim minorities, of course, because of colonial heritage in France and not in Sweden. But I think we have dealt with it in quite a similar way. And I think the welfare state, which is very sort of elaborated in both countries, may play a role here as well.
What is striking when me and Carl discussed this before is the different relationships to minorities with regards to language in particular, perhaps. That in France you have the secularism, laicité, and hence some assumed assimilation further down the road. Whereas in Sweden it's multiculturalism, different languages are not just allowed, but encouraged. And then further down the road, you hope for some sort of what's called, or has been called up until now, integration. Could you speak on that point?
Yeah, sure. I mean, if you listen to Swedish societal debate and when politicians talking about integration, they will always say that language is key. Everybody needs to learn language quickly. We need to put more resources into language learning. And I mean, I do still believe, after many years of research on language and integration, that language is important. But what's interesting is what I can see from my research. I mean, so you said, Johan, that we have had different policies with respect to language and also immigrant integration. France has this assimilation policy with very strong measures. When immigrants are coming, there's this contract of republican integration. You need to reach certain levels first to become a permanent citizen, then to become a citizen of France. We do not. In Sweden, we're one of the few countries who do not have that. In the 70s, we decided that Sweden should become a multicultural society. This is not something that has been decided in France. France has sort of stuck to the assimilationist path. So in terms of language learning, I would say that yes, people who come to France, they have more pressure on learning language, and they also have more immigrants coming to France who already have some knowledge of French because of the whole colonial past. And this is we have a completely opposite situation in Sweden. We don't have people who come here who know Swedish, and we don't put any pressure on them. So it's like, they are completely opposed. This is one of the reasons that I've been interested in working on this topic of comparison. Okay, so having investigated this issue of language and policies, you still see that, okay, so integration is not working so well in France either. It doesn't seem like it's the perfectly harmonious country. I mean, and this is where you start to ask yourself questions about other issues that come into play. And I think that one of the things that's why I also became interested in Florence's work on the Muslim Brotherhood, of course, because it seems like, okay, so there are other things going on.
You understand, Fanny, the fact that there is a lot of similarity between the strategy of the Muslim Brothers in Sweden and in France. And obviously, as Sameh Egyptian showed, they are very closely linked and regularly linked by meeting, by instructions, by plans. So when they have an experience in one country, they try to, and it worked, and they try to install this, to transfer this experience to other countries. That's why we can see very similar strategies all over the countries. So we say that the French Republic is very oriented to assimilation. Well, that's not really true. That's the official discourse.
Yeah, that's the narrative. Yeah, I understand.
The main narrative, but actually, since the 1990s, things have changed. We have been very much influenced by the anglo-saxon model of integration and not just assimilation in the name of the multicultural society, the right to be oneself and all things like this. And also because the left wing change of strategy has progressively lost the popular low class who has started to vote it to right wing, extreme right wing.
Yes.
So they decided to swap their basis of electoral basis and try to seduce the minorities, foreigners, women, Muslims. So there were the new targets of the left. Obviously, it helps to communitarize the society, and the assimilation was seen by the left wing as a old model, old-fashioned, ringard, and from the past. So the Republic is now divided between those who want the assimilation, the right wing, and the one who promotes the multicultural society, which is more the left wing. So, but it still remains a Republican left wing, but it's very weak at the moment.
This is something that I think is so interesting in France, that you have this division in the left. So you really have this Republican left, and then you have more like the Mélenchon left, right? What do you say? The unbowed France, the La France Insoumise, and they are more influenced by the multiculturalism ideas. And Mélenchon even said, I think it was for the last elections, right? He said that he used the word creolization, that this was a fact. This is not a political project, it's a fact.
Yeah.
But would you say that today the Republican left is quite weak, and that republicanism is flourishing more on the right-wing side?
Yeah, I would say it has weakened a lot until to almost disappear. And it's gaining at the moment a bit more strength because LFI, La France Insoumise, of Jean-Luc Mélenchon, is seen, and especially since the attack of the Hamas, as anti-Israeli and anti-Semite party, and it is they show their right face is their support to Islamism and their anti-Semitism. So I think things are going to change. Up to now, they have played the game of the structural Islamophobia,
right?
Which was a way to gain elector, and it works. It works because La France Insoumise gained 60%. I mean, 60% of the Muslims who have voted for the La France Insoumise, which is enormous, which makes a Muslim vote.
Yeah, but Johan and Kalle, this is basically the same situation we have in Sweden, right?
Yeah, but that part is that was my question, like Fanny, because why would the Swedish welfare state push so hard for the multicultural project? Have you seen any reasons as to what's the rationale behind it? Because if I understand your research, what your findings is you cannot find support for the taxpayer money spent on multiculturalism leading to integration in and of itself. That's not...
Yeah, as you know, I've been looking at how well people learn the language. If you see that as some kind of indicator or litmus test of integration. And yes, there it seems like the multicultural policy that we have adopted is not working very well at all. But this is, of course, also linked to what kind of immigration we've had. We've had immigration, especially over the last 10 years, from people coming from countries with extremely different languages from Sweden and with low educational background. So, I mean, not any policy in the world, I think, could have really helped so much integration with these people, but why would the left push for this? I think you would maybe be even more well placed to answer that question. Why did the left formulate this vision of a multicultural society in the 70s?
In Sweden, I think it's fairly clear because Swedish identity has been built especially since the 1970s, of this country of who has been very engaged with the third world, and you have this phrase now, sounds ridiculous, but the moral superpower, which is built upon, I think, the legacy of Olof Palme, especially freedom struggles, so-called independence movements in the third world. You have South Africa and Palestine, I think, are the two clear examples of pride within the socialist circles in Sweden. It goes back to, I think, many speeches Olof Palme made that, in the days where and 70s are the first decades of major refugee immigration into Sweden. And it was, I think, especially political in that we had mainly left-wing sympathizers from countries like Iran, Chile, and all over the world coming to Sweden specifically because we were a social democratic and left-wing country. And hence it tied very nicely into the foreign policy, but also internal policy objectives of Sweden, or social democracy, wanting to build a country that was modern, that was progressive. And this was very much seen as, these people were basically socialists, and they were, when they passed the border into Sweden, they were as social democratic as the next person. And then this idea, I think, ran amok because of laziness from the politicians, but also, I think it has to be said, opportunism from some people that they really thought that this was a new electorate, but and not only the problems would be outweighed by the fact that Sweden could do anything. So it was a utopian vision of Sweden, both as an external actor, but also in sort of internal terms.
But I think also, like, to continue on the rhetorical figure that you use, Kalle, that as soon as you cross into Sweden, you become a Swede or a social democratic Swede. The same can be said also of Swedes going to Palestine, that the moment you get into Palestine, you become a member of Fatah, the National Social Democratic Party of Palestine, which is a sibling party of the Social Democratic Party in Sweden.
Well, I wouldn't describe it as a social democratic party. I mean, it might be a member of the International or something, but describing Fatah as a social democratic Palestinian party, I think is a bit. But okay, I get your point. I'm
simply quoting their own how they praise the dynasties. I trust the social democrats. I listen to what they say. But the point is, you could go into houses in Gaza and find photographs of Olof Palme, a very evocative figure in Swedish politics and herald of this progressive turn in social democracy in Sweden. So it's built not just into the geopolitics, but the self-image, the metaphysics of what social democracy and the left has been in Sweden for a very long time. But the turn, to come back to your question, Fanny, like the turn with regards specifically to migration in the 1970s is when they make those decisions is very much in a realization that Sweden it played a real political game during the Second World War. And then this sort of bad consciousness / a need to pivot to the left, whereby you basically disconnect migration targets and integration targets or assimilation targets. So you then increase the volume of migration, but you decrease the intensity by which measures are done to integrate people, which of course, we shouldn't just make this political question. It also corresponds to the industrial crisis of the 1970s, where you actually lose the structural support for blue-collar jobs, whereby you basically, if you want to put it bluntly, you put all migrants into like a centrifugal machine of heavy industry, where people are forced to go to work, be in the union, and then join the football team on the weekend. And while that is in its own way authoritarian, it did create Swedes.
It did integrate. This is a bit similar in France. I think also that there were a lot of workforce, professional immigration over those early years, and then the industries shut down. And what happens? We both have created so ghettos where these people spend their time on welfare. basically. I mean, I'm putting it a bit bluntly, but I think this is what's happened both in France and Sweden.
And in a way, I think, Fanny, it's good that you used the phrase ghetto here, in the sense of in Sweden you had the social democratic ABC towns, which grew up as suburbs outside of the centers of larger cities. ABC standing here at Florence for work, living, and center or commerce. Is that correct, Kalle?
I believe so, yes.
But basically, these places like Rinkeby, Tensta turn into La Courneuves is kind of like development you've seen. But I wanted to raise the question, because Fanny, you brought up Same Egyptson, who we had on this podcast before, and Same, I keep being like impressed by him as a person, in the sense that he has been researching this topic for decades. And the reason for Same coming to Sweden, in a way, is because he saw the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt. He saw what they were trying to do to his country there. He had already been fighting them as a leftist or as a Trotskyite Marxist. And also him taking the name Egyptson is like...
son of Egypt.
Yeah, son of Egypt. But so basically, it that also shows, in a way, coming back to like bad consciousness, or what you raised, Florence, about Islamophobia being flung around as a way to tase and dose off your opponents to do what you want to do. And racism accusations from 70s in Sweden onwards has served that purpose as well. But then comes a person like Same Egyptson, who's a migrant Marxist who hates Islam. And it kind of has taken a person like that to be able to even do that research without being what's it called? Social assassination in media. I mean, they did try with Same Egyptson, but his research stands up to the test, and he also has support. But you cannot really divest his work from also the ability that he comes from a different background, is my sense of this. So then coming back, what's wrong with you, Fanny, and you, Florence? Why have you researched this topic?
I was listening about this question of language, which is much more important for you than for France, because people, Muslims coming from North Africa, where they used to speak French. So we have we could have easily assimilated those population because they were speaking French for most of them. Muslim brothers make this assimilation difficult, even sometimes impossible, because they decided by their plans, and which plans I detail in my book, to prevent the children to assimilate, so they can assimilate the language, of course, and learn Arabic, or even if they are not Arabic, there are also Berbers and other language in North Africa, but they have to learn the local language and the Arabic because they want to train an elite for changing the world. So what they are interested in is to train them, to make them as ambassador of Islam, but without assimilating the laicité, the secularism. One other thing linked to the language is that people like Same Egypson in France are numerous, because they came from Algeria in 1990s when there was this war, and they say, okay, what happened to us will happen to you, be careful. So we have been we knew that something will happen with the Muslim and the brothers and the Islamists, but we didn't believe them, because we thought, well, we are a secular country with complete different traditions, and we are rich. We will come over that easily. And so we didn't listen to them. And so now they say, well, look, it's happening to you, seriously. And with the Bataclan, with Charlie, with the assassination of the professors, of course, now the French population realize that this is not going to stop now. It's a very long process. But they don't know what to do. They are very aware of the danger, much more than the elite, elite. I mean, I think the people who are in the parties, responsible for the parties and the political men and women are not as aware of the population, and so they have their electoral markets, and they don't care about what people say. But the problem is that people don't trust politics anymore on this matter, and it's growing anger. Really, it's not hate; it's anger, which is different. They are not Islamophobic. They are hateful of. They are in anger with this situation where they don't feel protected.
Right.
And this is going to, I think, to set up a sort of milice with guns and people who want to defend themselves. We have seen that in Corsica, for example. There is no problem of aggression and from Muslims in Corsica, because the Corsicans decided to apply the law themselves. In a sense, they are putting pressure on Muslims, and so the cohabitation is fine. But because in France the police doesn't intervene, because political parties really play a funny role, and especially La France Insoumise, French people feel weak and not protected, and so the anger is growing. If we carry on this way, we'll have a civil war.
I think that one important point you make in your book, sorry, Kalle.
Yeah, no,
I think
problem.
that one important point you make in your book is that for a long time, people tended to think that that Muslim minorities were attracted or drawn to Islamism because they were not well integrated. That sort of it was society's fault, that society had failed in integrating these people, and then they turned to Islamism. But you say that it's the reverse, that they actually, I mean, that it is Islamism that hinder these people from integrating, because they do not want to integrate in this sinful society. And I mean, that must have been such an intellectual mistakes. I think it's the same thing in Sweden, that one has thought that this is because society has failed to integrate these people, that this sort of, this other power is controlling them.
Yeah, the answer of these people who want to conquer the world and say it, it's no mystery. Our answer is inclusivity. So obviously, when you want to conquer an inclusive part, then you win. It's obvious.
Florence, I have two questions. I think the Corsica example is very interesting because would you say, I mean, I see the corollary between, I mean, Corsica has been for a long time a hotbed of separatist resentment from France proper. I mean, you have had terrorists, separatist terrorism in Corsica. There's a national identity in Corsica that basically is unheard of in any region. Maybe Brittany would be the only other example in France. You had comment. So I would be interested in is there a between them taking the law in their own hands and this sort of separatist resentment? Is there a connection there, do you think?
Maybe they have a sense of strong belonging, identity, so with values. So obviously it helps, but they also have the feeling that if they don't show their strengths, and it's an island, then people will come numerous, and they will be in danger. So it's a fundamental reaction. So it's and also it's true that when we have strong groups who use violence and intimidation, and they understand the strengths. They do not understand words and nice words. They don't care about our nice words and to be gentle and to be welcoming. They don't care. They don't respect this. they respect the strengths, and Corsican understood that.
But coming back also, I think there's a really interesting point, because I mean, Florence, when you say that an endpoint here could be civil war, it's interesting then to view a similarity, as I read it, in France's and subsequently Swedish, because Sweden's very much looked to France for its institutional building in the unitary state, that you very consistently break down regionalism, both culturally and in a political sense, in a quite brutal manner during the 1800s. I think it's Carl at some point quoted de Gaulle for having said, how you expect to govern a country that has 500 cheeses.
Yeah.
And I mean, the reality behind that is in a way that you try then to create ex nihilo this republican citizen, that what you lose is some of your history and heritage, but what you gain is a unitary future. But I'm not sure if you agree with that assessment.
Well, I'm not sure. I'm not sure. I think it's much more regional, not by political means, but for example, for food, for traditions. Of course, they are not governing the area, the region, but they are very important for French in a daily life.
Yeah.
So it's a mix between a very political, centralized state and the cultural manner of life.
Yeah. Here's the anthropologist speaking, I think. But I completely agree. I would say that you have the politics, but then you have the everyday lives. Yes. I mean, of people who live in their regions and who would probably see themselves as Breton or, coming from different regions. But politically, it's very centralized, yes. Yeah,
and believe me, nobody would be happier than me to talk about like regional political identities. And one of my favorite songs is the Breton nationalistic song, Achas don Jalé do Aoui. I'm not sure if I got that one right.
No, this isn't the Breton separatist podcast, Johan. You must have taken the wrong turn.
Wouldn't it be nice if like a Republican Corsican came back, just to fix things?
Well,
talking about Bonapartism, this is I mean, one of the interesting, I wouldn't call it the paradoxes, but I mean in modern political history, it's very interesting to see a president like Eric Zemmour,
yes,
who is himself of North African Jewish heritage, and being, leader of I use the media language here, but far right political party, and I think this, very much puts into context the sort of political situation that France is in.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I mean, the first time I went to Israel, this is just a personal anecdote, but first time I went to Israel, I ended up on a beach in Tel Aviv, and I turned to the guy next to me, and I asked him, "Where are you from?" And he's like, "Yeah, I am from Paris, but I moved to like many of his fellow Jews moved to Tel Aviv." So I mean, coming back to the sort of circular conflict we have here of Israel-Palestine question manifesting itself back into Europe. I mean, we have Muslims coming to Western European countries and basically causing anti-Semitism and pushing Jews back into Israel, which sort of reinforces this whole cycle. And I just find that so very tragic, but also frustrating in a discussion when we're always having about, Islamophobia and everything. It's and especially the last couple of weeks, it's been I mean, the difference between what's been said and the sort of required, it will never happen again language that you have from all the liberal and leftist groups has really come into contrast with what's happening on the streets of Paris and Malmö and Stockholm.
I don't know what is the situation in Sweden regarding the feeling of the Jewish. In France, they are extremely worried.
It's the same here, I think. Maybe not as strong as in France, but a similar situation, especially in Malmö, a city in the south, where there's almost, I wouldn't say a Muslim majority, but where there's a very, where there's a very big population of Muslim immigrants.
The more they are worried, the more Muslim leaders cries that there is Islamophobia. It's really interesting. For example, the anti-Semitic acts are 13 times more high than the anti-Muslim act for a population which is 20 times less numerous. So it's incomparable. And there is a lot of report and around Islamophobia, and it is the lowest rate in France. It's 5 times less than the fact anti-Christian fact, and 17 times less than the fact the anti-Semitic fact. This is really the strategy of Muslim Brotherhood, not only to make people silent about Islamism, it's also a way to re-educate them. Because when they write a report, they generally increase the numbers of Islamic fact, anti-Islam fact. They also have a part where they give solution. And the solutions is always to say, okay, so we have to re-educate the media to talk about Islam the right way. We have to re-educate the politics. We have to re-educate the schools. You see, this is the way Brotherhood work on the context and make them what I call Sharia compatible.
Yeah, I love that word. I think, or maybe I don't like the content.
Can you unpack that?
It comes from the way I define the brotherism. I define it as a transnational movement that wants to conquer the world by making the world Sharia compatible in the first moment. It's what they call the Dar el-Had. So it's in middle between the Dar el-Harb, the territory of war, and the territory of Islam. And in between, they know that they will have to work on the context of the new territories. And it's what they call the Dar el-Had, the territory of contract. So what they want is to influence the Muslims and then the non-Muslim through the culture, through the economy, with the halal globalized market, and to not address too frontally to the politics. They don't want to go through the politics because they will have a lot of problems and they are not numerous enough. So they go through the culture, the economy, the social, the school, and the infiltration and the entrisme, which is their modus operandi. So their doctrine is the Wasatiyah, which is called the Islam of the Middle Way, which was theorized and applied to Europe by Youssef al-Qaradawi. The idea is to gather all movement of Islam from the jihadists to the more liberals and make them going towards the same way, to the same goal. So it is really it's a theocratic movement, not a theologian movement. So they put in action all these movements.
But can you see then Wasatiyah as a sort of alignment with leftist tactics of long march through institutions?
Yeah, it's very. I was going to say it's very Gramsci-esque. It's very. Yeah.
In what sense?
Well, just by turning from just the fact of Marxism shifting from a purely revolutionary force to seize power until a cultural force that seizes not only institutions but that has a cultural and wants to gain the hegemony of cultural thought and intellectual life.
Yeah, yes. And so practically, it means that whenever there is an activity which is linked more or less tightly to Islam, you always see Muslim brothers coming and try to arrange it in their sense. Yeah. So it's the way they proceed. So this is why they need a very close circle of Muslim brothers who are assermented. I don't know, how do you say prêter serment, Fanny? Ça se dit?
Bien sûr.
So you swear to the
sermon.
Yes,
a sermon.
And so this is a very close and extremely secret circle. And then you have affiliate structure which are working for the brotherism, for the brotherhood, but which is not a secret. It's an interface. And it's this second circle is much more wide, and it can cover all the France, for example, all the country with associations, cultural, sports, economy, all the domain you can imagine. Entries also in the enterprise, in the ministry, high functionnaire, high civil servants. So they go through infiltration to change the context.
Yeah. And also academia, right? I mean, I'm thinking about, you mentioned March of Institutions, Carl. And I mean, in academia, you write quite a lot about that in your book. And I think that would also be interesting to hear a bit more about, because that's obviously a danger.
So they really reflect on this strategy of approaching the campuses and changing, especially the social sciences, to make them more adapted to their will. So they call that the Islamization of knowledge. It's not a formula I have built, it's their formula. Islamization of knowledge was developed by in the 1990s in the US and in the UK in particular, because it's more the Indo-Pakistanis branch which has developed this. The idea is to build a knowledge which is compatible, which go into the frame of Islam. So the idea is not to destroy what exists, but to take all the Western science and to read it through the lens of the Muslim and adapt it to Islam. So the Faculty of Social Science have been targeted very soon. Also the Department of Arabic Language, of course, all the department which look at the policy in Middle East has been infiltrated since the 80s, by the Muslim Brotherhood to help to change the policy of European towards this country and to influence the social sciences. This has been helped by postmodernism and the relativism of postmodernism, because the relativism in anthropology, for example, tells you that your work is good if it is very close to the discourse of the indigenous. So the more you are like a scribe of the people you interview, the more you have the truth. So it's like if you try to analyze the discourse of people you study, you will analyze it in a Western way. So it's wrong. You just have to take what people say and say nothing about it, because this is the truth. So it's obviously a complete rupture with the epistemology of social science. It has helped. This methodology has helped to put forward the Islamist and fundamentalist discourse, which is which is self-sufficient itself. There is no need to analyze fundamentalist discourse because it does it itself. So there was I don't know if it's clear what I say.
Yeah, no, it makes perfect sense.
There was a positive prime to the student and to the researcher who were able to bring back the discourse as it is, without any analysis on it.
I was just going to comment that then we could gather that at least some social scientists have also acted as useful idiots.
Yeah. Oh, completely.
I would just like to comment that this goes to the very root of mine and Johan's friendship, because we met when Johan was the opponent of a thesis of mine that was actually talking about Foucault going to Iran back in 1979 and writing for Corriere della Sera, and ended up basically shunning Marxism and telling the students of Tehran University, you shouldn't be Marxist, you should listen to the Ayatollah Khamenei, because he was, quote, the most authentic voice of the Iranian revolution.
Right.
So, I mean, it goes back to a long time, and now we're seeing this sort of process just coming home from that moment of Foucault going to Tehran and saying, listen to the Ayatollahs. And now we are all, quote unquote, Ayatollahs in Europe to listen to. So, I mean, the question I think that everyone listening to this will come away with is basically, is there any way to stop this? I mean, because the institutions have failed. I think most of us can see that 50 years of immigration, of integration has failed in a lot of very serious cases. I mean, anti-Semitism is one of the things, but I think especially for Swedish people who now have, I think, twice the immigrant population of France. 20% of the country in Sweden are in some ways second or first generation immigrants. Ironically,
they are foreign born. 20% are foreign born. If you look at the people who have like foreign descent, then you are up to almost a third. So it's a third. So that's a lot.
But then you include me as well. So I mean, which is sort of ridiculous. But yes, point taken. And I think for many Swedish people, I think this is a realization that has yet to come and is sort of dawning on us. And I think many people don't want to look at this future in a sense because they only see darkness. Quite literally, the difference I think Sweden also is we don't have the sort of institutions that France has, the strength of, for instance, a capacity to govern the country in the sense of policing, in the sense of law enforcement. France has much more strength in this case. And I think, I mean, even though we have seen cases in, I think, Lyon, where people were shooting with Kalashnikovs in the street. But I mean, in Sweden is I mean, demographically, much worse situation. And I think it sort of begs the question, how is any sort of liberalism going to survive the next 50 years if this sort of trajectory continues?
Yeah, I think that we need to focus on two ways: the enforcement of the law in each country, because sometimes the law is just not enforced, and also what prevents the knowledge on these networks of brotherism. So obviously the university is playing this opacity work on what is these networks. And the fact is that the politics I met, the head of parties, they are not aware of what's happening. The counter-terrorism, they are aware, but apparently, and it's true in France, but also true in other country, the knowledge doesn't go up, doesn't go to the politics. So something is not working. We have the capacity of understanding what happens and looking at these people, even if they are within the law, which makes it more difficult, of course, to follow because they are in the law. So we do not have the legal instrument to follow them because they have done nothing wrong. But if we are more aware of their modus operandi, the way they act, we will be able to vote laws that make us able to follow them, to forbid them if we think they are toxic for the nation. So, but that means knowledge. It means that we need much more studies And so we need to throw out people who in the university who prevent these studies, who threat like me. I am threat. I cannot go to the university anymore. So these people should be thrown away and quickly, and we should be able to work on this topic. The European Union, we didn't talk about it, but play a very important role on the funding of this network, these brothers networks, through the funding of associations against racism, against Islamophobia, and so it's millions and millions and millions going.
What would be Florence? What would be the main actors funded through the European Union? Would you say?
Well, we have in the Commission, we have different schemes of finance for integration of Europe, against for immigration. So all this finance or research also. There are specific schemes of funding, and it's hundreds of millions euro going to found associations and research groups and other things, and Erasmus also. And when you look at the quality of research, it's appalling. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I'm working on this at the moment, and there is no filter. We pay, we fund, but rubbish studies, and I suppose that this money doesn't go to researcher or go to real action, but against the resolution of the problems.
I mean, if we can disband the Erasmus program, I'm all for this. They're like the lumpen proletariat of academia.
But talking about these schemes, this makes me think about the schemes that we had for the Swedish Research Council. I think it was 2016, 2017, when there was like a lot of money going into exactly like research on racism, research on discrimination, and not research on, let's say, more open topics such as, migration, but it was like really directed towards racism. And I think that there were quite a lot of studies dealing with Islamophobia then. So this is what you're saying is very interesting to hear about at an EU level, and there's so much more money involved at an EU level. But we have been doing exactly the same thing here in Sweden, I think, with the Swedish Research Council. So this is something too.
Yeah, and also this ideology is spread after in all Europe, because what happened is that they are funded by European Union, and then they go to Paris and say, okay, you see, we have money from European Union. Yeah. Can you give more money? So Paris say, oh, of course, because you are labeled European Union, so it's good. So we give you a lot of more money. So they end up with an enormous amount of money. And because they have this experience in Paris, then they will go in London and transfer this experience. It's the way the Muslim Brotherhood is very effective. It's when they win somewhere, they try to do the same somewhere else.
I want to pick back here in a way, coming back to Carl's question also, like what can be done with regards to all of this. And your comment, Florence, that it's not just that they get the money from the European Union, but they get the legitimacy, the whole, like the project with the European Union, that you use the strengths, as it were, of a liberal society against itself. But I think in a way, some of this comes off to me as, if I'm going to like provoke both you, Fanny, and Florence here, as a bit idealistic with regards to a liberal order, that now we've seen all these problems, we need to return to classic liberalism, which in one way, it makes sense. That's where we come from. We know what republicanism has, in a way, achieved. And then when you face this new enemy, then surely reinstating the order could be a way of dealing with this. But another one is the likelihood that a reform of academia, as we've discussed now, is going to happen. You, Florence, have paid a huge personal cost for the research you've done. I think it's fair to say, Fanny, that you are among the few researchers in Sweden who broach this topic for similar reasons, that there's a personal backlash and potentially also professional one. So the interests for the brotherism, as it were, are quite entrenched in Sweden and France. Coming back then to my provocation here, it seems in a way that the technological development of the West has been towards more networks, more connectivity. But ironically, it has not bred cosmopolitanism, but cults. Like the brotherhood and brotherism is possible in an age such as this, when you have a very centralized state that can feed off and connectivity whereby it can work around Europe. If they can't operate in France, they go to Belgium and vice versa. I'm thinking of this more in terms of dialectics, that isn't it more likely then that you have new figures such as Semu, or in Sweden you have the Sweden Democrats, who basically take the arguments of, well, you want to have representatives for populations or ethnic groups or minorities or claims to indigeneity. And then you turn them around to basically say, we are the indigenous group. We are the representatives for this people, for this religious creed. That is, you take on the language of your enemies to, in a way, combat them. And the way that the liberal order understands these political, then national or religious actors is also as populists, as far right, that themselves are the threat to the liberal order, more so than these minorities, because they think of them as minority. And I think this is why the Gaza conflict has brought these questions to a fore. I'm coming to a close here because I want to hear your thoughts on this. But like the claim from the left and from Muslim minorities is that Israel is a settler nation and hence illegitimate. But then the retort to that would be that no, it's global political Islamists who are a settler nation, who are acting as settlers within Western societies, and therefore they too will need to be combated with similar means. Do you see my point here? Like there's one recourse here where you do not end up in a liberal society, but with more enclaves, basically us looking like our enemies. Do you see my point?
Yeah. It's very well summarized. Yeah, but I think we have to think ourselves as at war state. So obviously we cannot go as a liberal country in times of peace when we are at war. So we have to understand that this situation. So with the protest and the riot in France in July, and then with the anti-Semite attack in France, the Jewish population in France is the largest in Europe, for 500,000, I think. So the sentiment, the feeling of being at war is coming softly, but it's coming. So it will be in favor of less liberal action, more protective. But it's the only way we have to protect our model, our society with its values. We have to accept, in a sense, maybe a highest level of security, which means more constraints, but in the name of being oneself and stay oneself.
I think that's a good analogy, because I don't think how Westerners now living appreciate, for instance, where we had 2 world wars and even the most liberal of countries had to enact legislation to basically curtail the rights of people living in them to fight a war. And it's sad, but I think it's the only metaphor that sort of rings true. People are now so entitled to all of the comforts of not having to think of being in some sort of conflict. Everyone thinks that, I'm atomized, I'm a liberal, individualistic person, I live in this society, but I could live anywhere. And I think just that sort of sentiment has to be combated, because the sort of nation state is the only thing that we have to sort of rule ourselves with. And if we can't have that, and if we can't sort of preserve the legal system and the sort of safety of the population and sort of combat what are its enemies, I don't think if these people were outspokenly fascist instead of Islamist, that this would be a problem. But here I think this is the conversation that needs to be had, that this is basically the same threat. It's not the same threat, but it's of a similar type. Fascism was in the 30s in Europe.
Yeah, I would like to read you a nice sentence from a philosopher, a French philosopher called Julien Freund. He was talking to pacifists and say, as long as we don't want enemies, we won't have any reason. But actually, it's the enemy who appoints you. And if he wants you to be his enemy, you can make the most beautiful protestations of friendship. As long as he wants you to be his enemy, you are.
Yes, and it is why Gandhiism doesn't work against, a fascist dictator, or there is a corollary to that. People don't know. I think it's one of the best things to get oneself in the mindset, because Gandhi wrote a letter to the Jews of Germany in the 30s, telling them to not fight against the oppression, but instead accept it and follow in his example. And many people have sort of read Gandhi as this very important figure, which he is. But he is that in the context of having to deal with a very liberal system in the United Kingdom that was repressive, yes, against its colonies, but it was not Nazi Germany. And this is the major difference between ideologies.
I agree.
I would just like to say one thing that I heard at a conference the other day, where there was a scholar who said that, the most problematic religion right now in France is, and then I thought that she was going to say something else, but then she said republicanism. Republicanism has become a religion, and it's really like tearing the country apart. And when I heard that, and I knew that we were going to talk to you, Florence, I was just wondering, how would you comment on that?
I would see at first, I would say, why? Why? And at second thought, if it's just an idea, if a republic is an idea, then it's our enemy. It has to be an act, something which guide our society, which is protecting our values. So if this is a republic, then it's our best friend. But if it's just an idea that we throw out the face of people, that doesn't mean anything. So it cannot just be an idea or a religion.
I think she also meant that it was sort of it was being too strongly atheist.
Well, I do not agree with this. The philosophy of the law of 1905, the laicité law, is to protect the society from religion, of course, but it's also to protect the plurality of religion.
Yeah.
So it's a liberal aspect. So I wouldn't say that the Republic is atheist. I would not think that.
Another taking that comment, Fanny, of like republicanism as a religion. Perhaps this is also in a way an anthropological comment question, Florence, but whether or not we are now facing concerted efforts from religious groups or movements, whereby in the West, there is then a need to realize that we too are religious, and whether or not republicanism can be that religion. So it's a loss of innocence then, in a way, that in order to defend yourself, you need to actually have an adherence or recognize that you are religious, and that what we are seeing in Gaza is an indicator that there are conflicting cultural or civilizational projects at play.
Yeah, I would like to comment on that, because I think this is one of the plagues, I think, of Western civilization in the last 10 years. It's the case of universalism. And I think an interesting discussion is to be had whether, universalism, this is a postmodern, basically a post-colonial comment about the nature of universalism, that it is European universalism. you could debate that for a long time. But I think the question sort of comes back to us whether we want it or not, because we've for a long time sort of taken it for granted, because the Western civilization has been underpinned by economic strength, by military strength, etc., etc. But in a world where that doesn't really ring true to the same degree as it did 50 years ago, 100 years ago anymore, we have to be faced with the question that are these values that we hold, A, universal? That's a discussion to be had. Mm-hmm. But B, are they better? And can we really answer that question fundamentally within our hearts and be affirmative that they are? Because I think a lot of people, and we've talked about this sort of relativism from the start of our conversation, but a lot of people in the West would say, well, no, it's just a set of values like anything else, and it doesn't really matter what you believe. This, I think, is the main enemy. I mean, either you think and believe that the system we're living in is the best one that's currently on this earth, or that there is a relativism of systems. Because the enemies we are facing, they have no doubt to which the system is the best one.
Yeah.
That's a very good point as well. I completely agree. And I think that we're kind of realizing now in Western societies that, yes, we do think that our way of living, our civilization is something to cling on to. But it is a bit late. But let's hope it's not too late.
D'un homme qui tombe d'un immeuble de 50 étages. Le mec, au fur et à mesure de sa chute, il se répète sans cesse pour se rassurer. Jusqu'ici, tout va bien. Jusqu'ici, tout va bien. Jusqu'ici, tout va bien.